Good morning, class. I'm sure most of you have already had your breakfast this morning and are looking forward to lunch later today. It's possible that you don't always eat the food you like best, but at least you won't starve. By starve, I mean not having food for days, weeks, or even die for lack of eating food. In some countries, people need to go into fields or forests to find food to eat. Some children even have to share a bowl of rice with their brothers or sisters once a day. In our global world system, there are surprisingly 1 billion people who are undernourished. After the second half of the 20th century, the majority of the severest food crisis was caused by several factors, actually, a combination of factors. One of the most common factors was drought, or water shortages and other extreme weather conditions. It resulted in poor harvests and failed harvests, which resulted in the scarceness of food and high prices of food. Overpumping of irrigation water in China and India in order to produce grain has resulted in the depletion of water sources. Saudi Arabia has already been out of the wheat production business due to overpumping of available water. Livestock diseases in cattle were also another common cause of the lack of food, as well as agricultural problems including erosion and soil infertility. China faces a severe drought which will heighten the cost of wheat production. In countries across Southeast Asia, floods have washed away crops. Another factor causing a severe food crisis in fertilizer costs, farmers in the poorest nations can't afford to use fertilizers for their crops. Their land is so depleted of nutrients, they can't effectively raise food without it. The price of fertilizer is rising because synthetic fertilizer is produced using oil-based energy sources. We're seeing a rise in food prices that has not been anticipated. It's largely because of demand and population growth. Secondly, we have around 3 billion people in the world who are consuming more grain and soybeans. And third, the United States is converting massive quantities of grain into fuel for cars. These are the three main sources of growth in demand that we see now. If this demand continues, the amount of stress on the low-income population will become a serious issue. There is a mismatch of supply and demand. Part of this disparity is linked to a very poor organization of the food system, including an abundance of waste, particularly due to the lack of storage facilities and adequate means to transport food which rots even before it reaches the consumer. In addition, some countries may have enormous food reserves, and the minute there's any trouble elsewhere in the world, those stocks aren't available any longer to the global food market. These countries tend to hold on to the food surplus, causing accelerated price movements at exactly the time of panic. It's unfortunate to see that coffee prices are at an 18-year high and sugar prices are at a 36-year high. We're in a situation where we need to deal with the causes and not the symptoms of food shortages. The main causes, again, as I said earlier, are population growth, or demand, climate change, and overpumping of groundwater. Unless we address these factors, the situation is going to continue to get worse. Climate change is probably the single most important threat to food security. Industrial types of agriculture have been a large contributing factor to the problems of climate change. Water is even more important than food. It's essential for life. Have you ever thought what it would be like to drink water from a dirty river or ponds? In America, we take fresh food and water for granted, and we know that it's safe to eat and drink. Help to unfortunate people in the developing world comes from charities. But not only charities help, you can also help. I know you're probably thinking, how? Well, let me tell you. There is something you can do. Teachers and parents can organize sales, raffles, and school drives to raise money for these charities. There are all kinds of ways to raise money for these charities. All you need to do is get together with your classmates and decide what you're going to do. You'll see that it can be quite rewarding to help organize these food drives, although this type of help is not really a long-term solution. This may be a humanitarian part of the solution, but it's merely a substitute for action on the deep causes of hunger and malnutrition. Kind of a throw food aid at countries and subsidize products on their markets in order to alleviate their immediate needs, which is not sufficient. There's now a realization that countries need to be given the ability to feed themselves. They must be less dependent on food aid and imports to sustain their food supply.